Your turn, Yugi boy.
What is up, guys? This is AlintheaYoh. It has been a while, right? I know. So today we're going to go over something that a lot of people have been asking me for in the wake of the new structure deck coming out. I'm going to go over the cards that are available to the Counter Fairy deck, a couple of different ways that you can build it, just kind of verbally going over it, and what cards you should be using and shouldn't be using, and cards to consider. So it's going to be a very raw cut this. I'm not really going to cut it too much. It's going to be very simple and just some pretty brutal, honest opinions of some cards, what you should be doing, how you should be running it. So without further ado, we'll go straight into it. If you don't know, there is a structure deck coming out in a couple of weeks that has a lot of Counter Fairy support, which involves, I think it's four cards, five brand new cards actually, if I remember correctly, which is the new Parchef card, which is the Angel Paladin. Then we also have Age Angel Minerva. We also have the Angel Valkyrie. One new continuous spell card to Sanctuary the Parchef, and then a counter trap to go along with it is the Reincarnating Parchef, which we will put there. So without further ado, we'll go straight into it. Just talk about the monsters, the spells, the traps, and also the sideable traps that you can use. So if you don't know what the Parchef does, basically has the effect here. It says if you activate a counter trap or you negate the activation of a spell, trap, or monster effect while this card is in your hand or in the graveyard, you can banish 2 other fairy monsters from your hand, field, and or graveyard to special summon the card. Then when it basically does any form of battle damage, you can add a Parchef card or one counter trap card from your deck to your hand, and this does piercing as well. So you've got a big level 8, I think it is, or level 10, whichever way. I know it's right there, it's level 9. I was kind of nearly there, with a big 2,800 defense attack and 2,300 defense. It's a light fairy, as you would expect. One of the big things about this card is that you can easily special summon it by banishing 2 fairies from your hand, field, and or grave. I like that effect, and the reason why I like that effect is because if you have ever played counter fairies in the way that the new versions have been in the past few years, not the old versions that I know a lot of people slate me for, saying you hardly run any monsters. Adapt, guys, come on now. You don't play a lot of fairies, and there won't be many scattered around in your hand, field, and or grave. But the fact that you can go from your hand, field, and or grave, it's very good because it means that you can spread out the amount of monsters that are there. You can bring it out much easier. The counter trap also brings it out, but I'll get to that in a little bit. For me, this is a maximum 1 of 0 to 1 unless you are building a deck around it. Unless the build is centered around getting this out by using 3 of this and like 3 of the counter trap, for example, I would say 1. The reason why, you don't want to draw it, you don't want it in your hand at all. It clogs. It clogs against Card of Demise, it clogs against many other things, and you really don't want to draw it because it's possibly one of the worst dead draws you have in this deck, so you do not want to run it. Moving on is one of the most important cards that has come out is Angel Sage Minerva. Each time, so these are all light fairy level 4s, I'll just ignore that, but the 1700 attack is decent. Each time a counter trap is activated, this card gains 500 attack immediately after it resolves. Also, if Sanctuary of the Sky is on your side of the field, if there is a Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, you can add a counter trap with a different name from the activated card from your graveyard to your hand. So basically it stacks 500 every time a counter trap resolves. It gets big really quick, so this is a nice thing that covers one of the main problems that exists in counter fairies not being able to get over big monsters. But not only that, if you have Sanctuary in the Sky in the field, which by the way, your builds really need to go down that route these days. Sanctuary in the Sky builds are now not just this awful thing that has some gimmicks in, it's kind of now the way you would run it, in my opinion. You don't have to, but you benefit so much more from running these cards, which I'll get to, so don't worry about that, I'll go over it. This is going to be a long video, by the way, so people who have missed me, hi. The main reason to run this is you recycle cards back into your hand. You can keep looping things. So a very important card called Drastic Drop-Off, which I'm sure you all know is there. Nearly thought I missed it out, even though that would have been absolute criminal. This is one of the easiest ways to get this effect off. It's the same as when you get Bountiful effect off with a Drastic Drop Off. You really need to use it with that. Then you can keep using it, recycling it, beefing it up and such, and just straight away it's just a really powerful card. When you combine it as well with the Sanctuary of Parchef, which does give it extra 300 attack, it goes up to 2k straight away. You activate Drastic Drop Off, it's 2-5. Already that's big, so it's very important. One of the other new cards that came out is Valkyrie. Now, I will be honest, I don't run Valkyrie. I don't like it. I don't think it nets you enough advantage to run it. It's if you negate the activation of a spell or trap card or a monster effect, add one light fairy monster from your deck to your hand, you can only activate it once per turn. So the once per turn thing is very annoying because, you know, Minerva doesn't have that, so why would this? But nevertheless, one of the best things that this could get is Honest, which I haven't really... Oh, no, it's there. You could get Honest, but it's not good enough. Even with the Ties of the Brethren build, it's just not good enough. You could run one if you really want, if you do run those Honests or anything like that to put the Fairy God into your opponent. You can run it, but I wouldn't recommend it because I think it's a wasted space. So going on to the other new cards, which I'll just pop here. Where's the other one? I'll go over the new cards in the structure deck and then we'll do that. So the new spell card is a new replacement or alternative to Sanctuary in the Sky. It is a continuous spell card and its effect reads as follows. This card's name becomes Sanctuary in the Sky while it's on the field or in the graveyard. I'm not sure why in the graveyard, but never mind. All fairy type monsters on the field gain 300 attack and defense. Set cards set spell and trap cards on the field cannot be destroyed by card effects. Also, neither player can target them with card effects. Once per turn, you can target up to 3 fairy type monsters and or counter traps in your graveyard with different names. Place them on top of your deck in any different order. So, important thing. Counts as Sanctuary in the Sky. Tick. Pretty decent. Kind of like that they didn't make it a field spell, properly thinking about it now, because it means you can run the Sanctuary in the Sky, the original, and kind of balance them, and it means that you have a better chance to getting to them. The other thing is it gives 300 attack and defense. It's nice because it does make Minerva, as I said, the 2k attack. It makes Bountiful a 1/9. You know, it makes Ariadne 2k, and it also makes things like Sage a 19 as well. So it is good. It is good. But one of the most important things is that your set spell and trap cards can't be destroyed by card effects, which is really good, and they can't target them either, which really protects your back row. It means that they have to go after this, and then they have to try and go to your back row, but you're probably going to protect this card anyway with the counter traps that you will have at your arsenal. So, really good card. It's kind of one of these really important things, and I don't really use the other effect, the stacking from your graveyards very often, but it is there if you do need it. So if you are running a little bit low on resources, you can just keep putting them back there. You know, if you need that drastic drop-off or whatever, and you've got a Bountiful on the field, you can set cards up as well, because you could put them back, then you could activate a counter trap, get Bountiful's draw, you're drawing straight into the cards that you know you're going to get and want. So there's a lot of setup plays with that, and it's pretty decent. And then the final new card is the reoccurring Parchef. Reincarnating Parchef, sorry. It's a counter trap. When a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated, reveal one counter trap in your hand, discard one card, then pay 1,000 life points. Negate the activation. If you do, shuffle that card into the deck. Then you can special summon one Parchef monster from your deck or extra deck. So the targets for this are 1, the very new one, and 2, a very old one, which is Avenging Knight Parchef, which is a synchro, which we'll get onto a little bit later. This card is really good. It's a really good counter trap and a nice little hole for the deck. Now, what I mean by that is that the counter traps that you normally run don't generate this amount of advantage. There are important things that this card does, which is mainly special summoning out from the deck or extra deck. So that's really important because it gives you board presence then with a big monster, minimum 2/6 with the synchro. If you do have the new continuous spell, that's 2/9, and then vice versa if you have this 2/8 and then 3/1. So it gives you a good board presence, and it gives you a scary monster that starts recurring as well. So it puts your opponent in a bit of an awkward position. This also shuffles cards back into the deck. That's good. Doesn't destroy it, doesn't remove it, it just puts it back into the deck, which is a very important thing in my opinion, because in negates the activation if you do shuffle that card into the deck. It means that you remove things from the game that your opponent might actually require in the graveyard. And not only that, the way that you would activate this card, I think some people might get a little bit confused, especially the way that Guiding Ariadne would work with it. This is the official way that it works. If you have Guiding Ariadne up and then you activate this card, the cost is to reveal a counter trap in your hand. You have to have a counter trap in your hand to be able to activate this card. Guiding Ariadne does not remove that. Sorry, it is not a cost, it's an activation requirement. Ignore what I'm saying. See, this is why I'm not cutting it up, I'm not editing it, because you can see how I am. It's not a cost, it is an activation requirement. Then everything after that is a cost. So if you have Guiding Ariadne, you reveal the card, counter trap, and then that's it. You don't have to discard a card and you don't have to pay 1,000 life points. But if you remove Ariadne from the situation, you will look at the 3 different things that happen until you can actually do anything. You reveal a counter trap in your hand. Okay, you have to give your opponent knowledge. You discard a card. Note, that isn't the card that you have revealed. It can be if you so want, if you want to not give away 2 cards in your hand. But it means that you can get some possible dead cards out of your hand. So if you do have, like, if you did draw into the Angel Paladin, or if you do have, say, for example, a spare like Sanctuary in the Sky or whatever in your graveyard, or even a counter trap, if you have Minerva on your side of the field, you can get it back type thing. So you're not really losing all that much. And then you pay the 1,000 life points. It's not that much of a big cost requirement, but you do have to be very careful the way that you do it, because if you do get this off things like Card Demise, you're probably not going to be able to activate it unless you use Minerva or have a Bountiful on your side of the field and draw into a counter trap or add it to your hands, because you don't have the activation requirement there. So that's very important, but it's still an incredibly good card. And that is basically all of the new cards. It's taken me like 11 minutes just to talk about them. So we will start to speed through the ways that you can run them. But in my opinion, you run 1, you run 2 to 3, you run none, you run, depending on your build, 2 to 3, and depending on your build, 2 to 3. So Bountiful Artemis. There was someone, I can't remember, it was like Twitter feed put up saying, do you really need to run Bountiful now that Ariadne's around? Yes, Bountiful is one of the most important cards for the deck. It helps you generate advantage. It gives you that monster and a good Ties of the Brethren target as well to keep generating advantage and put pressure on your opponent. Because if you have this and also Minerva, where is she? There she is. Minerva on the field, and you have like Sanctuary in the Sky or the new spell cards, the Sanctuary of Parshef, which is very common. You've added 2 cards to your hand. You've added 1 from the graveyard and you've drawn 1. That's a lot of advantage already. And every time you activate a counter, just get it back. Just get it back. You just keep going. So Ariadne is incredibly important. So is Bountiful Artemis. You need it. I honestly will support this card till the day I die. You run probably 3. I always run 3, but you can run 2 if you really want, if you are playing like a quite eccentric Ties of the Brethren build. Guiding Ariadne, run 3. Don't talk to me about that card. You run 3 unless you're not playing the deck right. Unless you really want to pay life points and lose. This card wins games, hands down. So we also have Zeratis. Zeratis is in conjunction with, obviously, Sanctuary in the Sky. So the way that you can run a build is run, say, 2 Zeratis and 1 Sanctuary in the Sky, or 3 and 2 if you are also running the Sanctuary of Parsheth. So a good kind of variation is running 2 to 3 of that and 2 and 1. It just means that you can get to that Sanctuary in the Sky. What it also means is what these do. If you draw into a Card Demise, if you open up with this in your hands and you do have Card Demise, it's a free card to get out of your hand, so you're not discarding anything, and it also means that you do get to a card that starts getting your activation requirements and costs up there, with the actual Minerva and so on and so forth. So I really like it. I think it's worth running because it means that it kind of unlocks your deck being able to do it and get to that Sanctuary in the Sky. Next up, we have a card that I've actually started running a little bit. Sage of the Sky. It obviously goes in with Sanctuary in the Sky. It's one of a very old card. Every time a counter trap is activated, gain 1,000 life points. If you have Sanctuary in the Sky in the field, destroy a card your opponent controls. Good destructive power, because you're more often than not you are going to have a card that states that Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field. You run 1, in my opinion. You don't run any more. But the reason why I would run this is because you're running Ties of the Brethren. It gives you a really, really good Ties of the Brethren choice. And it also gives you a bit of a headache as to what to choose. Because, if you've got Bountiful or anything like that, you've got that to choose from. Then you've got this, and then you've got that, and then you've got this. So there's a lot of different ways that you can choose a card. But I really like it. It does help you a lot. Especially if you haven't got to that Ariadne yet. It kind of takes the edge off a lot of the life that you are paying. So it's definitely a card to consider. Really good, and a really nice old card as well. Next up, we have a Barrier Statue of the Heavens. This is a good card, meta depending. If there are a lot of light decks running around, don't run this because it's pointless. So at worst, it's a good side deck card, but it's mainly a Ties of the Brethren target. That's basically what it is. So you should all know what that does. No monsters apart from Light Monster Special Summons. You all have lights, so it's fine. So next up, going on to some of the more different cards that you can consider or not consider. First off, I will say you do not run these 3 cards. These are old counter trap cards, and you don't run them. This is too slow. Harvest Angel Wisdom, although it looks amazing and it's a really nice secret rare and I do like it as well, it's too slow. Don't use it. It's bad. You will never get that effect off at a optimum time, to be honest. Next up, Dark Dragon Lord just doesn't work anymore. Too slow. Not useful. Not really good. You have better things out there, if I'm completely honest. Clogs your hands. Not very good at all. And then obviously the original, it's just bad. So let's get rid of these like that. They are bad cards. Do not run them. So where was I? So Aurora. This is an interesting card that some people can consider if they so wish, because it is just one of those cards that can potentially lock your opponent out. If you don't know what it does, it's a 1/5 1000 level 4 light fairy. Neither playing special monsters. When an opponent, when another monster is normal summoned, when another monster is normal summoned to either player side the field, destroy this card. It just kind of locks out those special summon heavy decks. If you really want to look at it that way, it's easily gotten around. But there are other ways that you can back it up. For example, if you were to use things like Force Back or anything like that, negate the normal summon, blah, blah, blah. So there are ways around it, but I mean, it's something just to keep in the back of your mind more than anything, that it is available to you if you want to build some form of like lockdown or anything like that. Next up, we have Liberator. This was something interesting just because of the new card of the Angel Paladin. Angel Paladin obviously removes your fairy monsters from the graveyard. This can get them back. So it's pretty decent. I wish that this said like you could only add 1 or 2, or up to 2, sorry, but it says 2, but I guess the activation required doesn't really matter because of this. This definitely has to banish 2, so blah blah. It's interesting. You can look at it if you really want. It's not that important. It's only something if you are running a really heavy build of this, so and even then I would only consider 1, but it's also good because it's a Ties of the Brethren target as well, so wherever there it is, Ties of the Brethren. And finally, for the monsters that I'll talk about is Honest. Honest is obviously a good card. It can be searched with this card that I don't really want, to be honest, and I'll just remove my phone because otherwise it's going to start vibrating a lot. No jokes. You can add it obviously with like Ties of the Brethren, because you can special summon out, then add it to your hands, bounce it back with its own effect. But it really clogs with Card of Demise. If you have it with Card of Demise, it's just bad, because unless you're going to set it or something, it's a dead card in your hand and you're not really going to be able to use it. So I don't like Honest in a lot of builds unless you aren't running Card of Demise, and then you would be solely running a Ties of the Brethren build, and a very powerful one at that, and that's the only reason you should never run Card of Demise in this deck, because you've just specifically gone for a Ties of the Brethren build. But they do work together. So we'll go into the spells now, because I know that I have obviously spoken a lot about some things, so I'll skip over some because there's not much new apart from the new one, which I've already spoken about. Ties of the Brethren. I feel that this is one of the most important cards in the deck going forward, simply because of the important monsters that you have. Ties of the Brethren allows you to generate so much advantage just off 1/2 cards if you count the monster that's already there. If you target any one of these, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that you will probably running, at least I run these 6 in my main build, you can access any of them, which is really important, because it means that you can unlock the potential of the Minerva, you can unlock the potential of the Bountiful, and then also have the options for the Barrier, and also for the Sage of Sky. So there's a lot of ways that you can build it. More often than not, it will be 1, 2, or 3 out of these 2 that you'll be getting out from the effect, and that is just a ridiculous amount of advantage. If you do have the card of Sanctuary in the Sky in the field, you're drawing a card every time a counter trap is activated. You're adding a counter trap most likely when something's activated from your graveyard to your hand. Then you are also gaining 1,000 life points and popping a card on the field. That's 3 things that you're doing to disrupt your opponent and gain advantage. Pretty good if you put it that way. Yes, it is obviously. It does have some downsides, but I think it's just too many good upsides for it, so you really want to run Ties of the Brethren. Spoke about Sanctuary in the Sky. You can play it if you really want, or you don't have to. I really like it just as an extra option. It's also a bit of deck thinking, as I said, with Zeratis, so pretty good. Card Demise, run it at 3. Do we need to discuss that? Maybe, I guess so. If you don't know what Card Demise does, just read it. The card's insane. It's one of the main ways that you will fill up your hand and set up your plays. The important thing is, though, with the fact that you do have Minerva, if you don't have Card Demise, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world like it might do in previous times. Card Demise on its own will win you games, but it's not solely needed. It isn't the most important card in the deck anymore. It's up there as one of the most, but it isn't the most. So it's something to consider, but I really think you should be running Card Demise at 3 in this deck regardless. So going on to the pot cards, there's some interesting stuff. In my testing, I ran 2 Pot of Desires, and every single time I'd say about 7 times out of 10, it annoyed me. It didn't work for me. I banished a lot of the stuff that I wanted. You definitely wouldn't run one Angel Paladin if you're running Pot of Desires. I will say that because it's guaranteed to get banished. And then there goes some of your power plays. Pot of Desires is something that if you are running like a 60 card version of a deck, then yeah, you can do that, and I'm yet to look into that properly. I fleeted with the idea but then got bored of it very quickly, but I'll probably go back to it at some point because there are some interesting things that I think I can do with a 60 card version of this deck, but the consistency problems are an issue, alas. That's where Pot of Desires would come in. So you can run it if you want. I don't recommend it as such, but it is a possible potential good card. But just think you are banishing 10 cards that are pretty important in this deck. Regardless of the numbers that you'll be running a lot of 3s and 2s. You still banish a lot of potentially good cards, and it does have the potential to turn off your Ties of the Brethren, which is a very bad thing, because that means dead cards that you are drawing and you do not want them in this deck. Pot of Duality is a card that you would run in sync with a Card of Demise if you weren't running Ties of the Brethren. You would run that at 3 and probably that at 2, probably 3 if I'm honest. That's what I used to run it at. But if you're running Ties of the Brethren, I don't think Pot of Duality really needs to be there because it kind of becomes a dead card. You would look at playing other draw cards instead of a Pot of Duality. Now the reason being is that Pot of Duality blocks you from being able to use Ties of the Brethren. If you have just single draw cards in there like this or 1 day a piece, then it makes it more beneficial because you aren't having to kind of set or ignore a dead card in your hand. So that's why I say Pot of Duality would be run in a deck or a version that has Card of Demise with no Ties of the Brethren. But if you're running Ties of the Brethren and Card Demise, which I would recommend, then Pot of Duality is something that I feel you don't run. And as I said, Upstart Goblin, 1 day pieces, your normal 1 draw cards. If you feel like you have a bit of space, which I'd be impressed with, you can add them in. So then finally to go into some of the counter traps that you run in the deck. If you are running the Sanctuary in the Sky build, you run Divine Punishment, end of. You run it, it's amazing. One of the most important cards, I actually think probably the most important counter trap card with the way that you can run it and the way that it sets off your combos and your potentials is Drastic Drop-Off. Drastic Drop-Off is one of the few cards in the deck that doesn't require your opponent to do something to be able to activate it, and that's very important because if you're sat back with a Bountiful, for example, and you just need to get some draws off and you're waiting for your opponent to do something, they just normal summon a monster and attack over it, it's kind of annoying. At least if you have Drastic Drop-Off, you take something out of your hand and you get a draw. So you're kind of leveling out as to what card you're activating. Even if that Bountiful then does die, you're getting 2 draws, 2 cards out of your deck by going into your next turn. So it's a very important card in that sense, and it does disrupt your opponent a lot if you use it correctly. Being able to time the use of this card is imperative, and it's something that should not just be shotgun activated at times. Because you can lose a duel just by doing it. Wait until people search stuff, then take it out of their hand. It's so good. Ultimate Providence, run it at 3. Card is amazing. You negate everything. If you have Ariadne up, you do not have to have a card in your hand to activate it. Unlike the Reincarnating Parchef, it requires you to activate. It requires you to reveal a counter trap for its activation cost. For its activation requirement, not cost. I will always get them confused when in my head. And this is like 11 o'clock at night, so I'm tired. The Ultimate Providence's cost is to discard the same type that you're negating. So therefore, Ariadne removes the cost, therefore you don't have to have any cards in your hand. Official ruling, don't try me on that, because that's how it is. I've played multiple tournaments with that. That's how it is. That's the official ruling. Solemn Brigades, you run it. You run them. You run them at max. That's too good not to run. I don't care what you say. Some interesting cards that you can consider. Negate Attack is a free card that when your opponent attacks, obviously you activate negate and end the battle phase. This is good with cards like the Bountiful because it means that you get to get a draw and protect it. Also with Minerva, if you've just summoned it and waiting to activate cards, you start to get a bit of profit from them. So Negate Attack is something you should definitely consider. If you're not running the Angel Paladin, I would highly recommend running Negate Attack because it gives you that extra layer of protection. Dark Bribe is something you can run if you want. You don't really have to because you've got a ridiculous amount of negates anyway, but it's something that you can consider. The same with Grand Horn of Heaven. Grand Horn of Heaven is alright. It gives your opponent a draw, which is not that great, puts them into their main phase, so it can be used in at times successfully, but it's one that you should really look at when building your deck. Do you really want to end your opponent's main phase? Do you think that you can effectively disrupt them completely by doing so and giving them a card? So it's one of those that you should still consider. I will occasionally put it into the main deck just to see how it goes, because it does have the potential to completely disrupt your opponent and catch them off guard, which is really good, and that's what this whole deck does. It catches your opponent off guard, it disrupts them, and it's a very important way to build a deck. Extra deck, very quickly, depending on how many of the counter trap you run the same amount of Parshev, minimum 2, just leave it at that if you really want. The only thing I'd say, links, you don't really need links, you're never really going into your extra deck apart from the counter trap cards, but do run the Utopia Prime engine, so run 3 of these kind of. So run 2 Utopia, this and the other 39, and then 2 Lightning, because it means that you can get over some problematic cards. Going up to 5k is pretty good, and being able to block your opponent is also decent. So it's something I would recommend just having there in case, and then your usual useful Xyz and like Decode Talker and stuff like that if you want. So going on to side deckable cards, I've just pulled out some of the most notoriable ones. Curse Trap Pull is pretty obvious. If you're going against decks that are light and dark, play it. It's really good. Wiretap is something I don't think you need to run at all. Now, a lot of people will say, well, you can use it in the mirror match. Why? You don't want to give your opponent their counter traps back into their deck so that they can search it again and use it again. You want the counter traps negated. And you already have a lot of cards in deck that you can battle against counter traps. You really want to counter trap battle, you have that, you have that, you have everything. So, and that. You have a lot of different things that can stop counter traps anyway, so don't run wiretap whatever you do. Go against, if Cleefort or something like that is really there, you have Force back. Curse Seal of Forbidden Spell, you can negate a lot of spell cards in the deck already, but if there are pinnacle cards, like in Cosmo format, for example, when they had, obviously Cosmo Town, negating that was ridiculously good because then they just had 2 dead cards in their deck. They couldn't get their draw engines off, they couldn't get their banished back, everything like that. Against Monarchs, the amount of times I hit like Pantheism, they can't use anything then. The amount of times I hit the Stormforth, just ridiculous. So it's a very powerful card, but only used against decks that have key spell cards that require things to be used, to kind of use as an engine. So use that as you want. Again, Debunk depends on the deck. Unwavering Bond kind of depends on the deck. Shotline is an alright card if you really want. It, again, depends on the deck and how you want to run it. Recall, not a terrible card, but you have a lot of negation in here. If, like, Solemn Strike would go down, like get hit, for example, it won't now, but if it got hit to like 1 or something, I would look at this and Divine Wrath as replacement cards. And then finally, Red Reboot, just to say, this card's bad. This card isn't for counter traps. This card isn't for counter fairies, I should say. It's awful. There are way better cards in the deck that you can use apart from this. And stop saying this card's good, because it's not. If you want to use it in a non-counter fairy deck, fine, but it's not a good card. Don't care what you say. It's really, really bad. So, even if you use it with Ariadne and you don't pay half of your life, there are still better cards in this deck that do that job way better. So, that is it. That is an overview of the counter fairy deck. When it's coming out, just to give you some examples of things that are at your disposal to kind of run the deck. The deck's strong, but it's currently still a little bit inconsistent. I'm struggling to find a build I'm happy with. There are builds that are good and bad. I still have a lot of builds that I want to test, but I have been busy, so I haven't been able to. But it's good, but I still need to find that sweet spot. And I think I will find that sweet spot. But it's just finding that sweet spot, because there are so many different ways you can now build this deck. You go down the not playing the Ties of the Brethren and then playing Ties of the Brethren. Then spanning off both of those, you are deciding, do I want to play Ancient Sanctuary in the Sky, or do I not want to play Sanctuary in the Sky? So already you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 builds. Then you look down if you want to play the 60 card deck. That's another build, which you will be running both of those cards in. standard, then you just have so many other different ways to build it. What monsters do you want to put in there? Do you want to keep it a really small monster lineup like how I used to do it? Or do you want to flesh it out a little bit for the Ties of the Brethren? There are so many different ways that you can build it. It's really difficult to kind of pin down, to be honest. And that's the problem I've been having. I think I'm happy with the 40 card version that I have. And you may have seen it on stream, people who are watching streams like last year. That version has changed a little bit. Not a huge amount, not hardly anything, but it has changed. So when the deck does come out, I will profile it. I think I have to. I really should profile that deck. It means that I do have to get my whole setup up again, which is a bit of a pain in the arse. So I'll see what I'll do. Maybe even I'll just do Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro one, we'll see. But I will get a version out to you once I have time. So that is it, guys. That is the deck profile kind of overlay view of Counter Fairies. That there are just so many ways you can build this deck. It's literally ridiculous. But I really think that it's a promising deck and something that is really good and will catch you out if you do not pay attention to it. And if you don't know what you're doing against it, it's going to be bad. Also, one quick thing. For people who want to play Counter Fairies, it's a very difficult deck to play. I will say that. People think you negate it and that's it. You negate, you negate, you negate. If you go against a good player and you just negate everything that they do, they will beat you. They will manage their resources far better than you will. There are times when you have unbreakable boards, when you do have like, you know, the Sanctuary in the Sky with Minerva, with Bountiful and counter traps. You're just looping. It's kind of very, very, very difficult for you to lose from that point. But establishing that setup requires time, requires patience, and requires clever activation windows. If you don't know the deck you're playing against, you're probably going to lose because the whole point is disrupting your opponent. Just going off the years I've played this deck and bringing it to tournaments. Take, for example, my regionals that I topped with this deck. Not this one, obviously, but the Counter Fairies previously in Monarch format. The amount of times people, and I knew this, people were trying to bait out my negations when I had like 2 or 3 cards in my back row. Even one card, they knew I had that one card, for example, if I got it off Pot of Desires, or Pot of Duality, sorry. They knew I had that one negate. They would bait so much stuff out just to try and be able to, you know, do what I just said, bait out that card so that they can run through and play the cards and make the plays that they wanted to. But I held back and I knew that they were trying to bait cards out. And when something did come up that they needed, that, you know, to progress their game state, I negated it and stopped them dead in their tracks. And that is the way that you play this deck. You need to be clever, you need to understand the format, understand each deck and how they work. Right now, I wouldn't be very good because I don't understand most of the decks that are running around because I haven't paid attention for the game for a good part of a year. But in learning, that's how you play this deck. And honestly, that is the only way to play this deck. You cannot just negate everything and hope for the best, because it will not happen. Because especially with the fact that your pendulums are now in your back row, so it means that you will have an Ariadne there, so you only have 4 back row. Then if you are running the new if you're running the continuous spell, that means you have 3 to set. You have to manage 3 back row. It's kind of difficult with the amount of cards that are running around that people can activate. So you need to be very careful with what you're activating, what you're responding to, and what you're negating. So that is it, guys. Let me know down in the comment section below if you're going to be using the Counter Fairy deck. I can't promise anything. I'll try and do more videos. Have a little bit been getting a bit of inkling and passion back for, you know, for some Yu-Gi-Oh! And I have been testing a deck that I'm going to show you. I'm not going to show you the actual deck, but I'm going to show you the name, and it might incur some wrath with people. Oh yes, a Quasar Exodia Link deck. So let's see if people want to see that, but I'm still working on it. Don't throw your toys out the pram, but there have been some hilarious boards that I've been able to get out, including 2 Quasar and a Firewall Dragon on the same field at the same time. That was funny. So that is it, guys. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of the deck. Are you going to go buy the structure deck or not? It's out in a couple of weeks, so go check it out. Make sure to give me a like, comment, subscribe. Hopefully you're all having a good 2018. That's what we're in now. Oh dear God. And I should catch you guys later. I'll try and do more videos, I promise.